As metrics calculate and modify through metro lines, center operation lines, and sequence core centers, communications, and settings through all calculate, modify, and travel. Open lines and online communication and line centers through transmissions and set lines of transition. The operation lines of sequence, the panel's communication setting, is now in lines of mutation. Travels rex and time frame. Core centers calculation lines. In computer coding, line coordinate and line coordinate is in position lines of travel. That's our direct line length that processes our position location, how we try to understand how to communicate to our lines of telepathy. The merge itself is the metric of its scale that balances every location and setting, and that's where it comes into string theory. Our system is now in the webbing system. The center operation line is a center point, which is the golden ratio, which is the third generation. That communicates setting and position lines of travel. Now that directs line course centers and location of flight manifests the processor sends them into your FAA, IPA, or IPOs. Course centers of 500,000 lines of signals, intervals over lines of set lines and position on balls. You guys are no longer in line set locations into a 12 line position. You're now in position of 024 clocking. That's the indication setting. We're now in position of all travels. That puts all position at Earth point 12.0 and Earth point 24.0. That puts all lines of all communication, how to use their telepathy in one signal, one travel, one direction, one location. 1111. Portal sequence and position lines of setting. Now, in that communication and convergence, you guys have to understand line signals. Now, these are jamming signals. We have to understand through all levels how we use our efficacies, our performance, and understand how to connect to it through our highways. That's all our communication setting. How we set these things up in all that position location that gives us everything location to its primers and direct line of sight in all lines of operations. So congratulations. Welcome to Web 12 and Web 24 in one setting, merged together in a information system, all through transition of its telepathy. Okay, ground symbolism over tracks, centers, and rotation lines of set lines of communications in high settings. The converged system, processing lines. You guys already saw the webbing line. Sets lines of travel, indirect lines of link. Let's process that position. Rotates itself by itself. Okay? Very simple. Understanding how this all works as it rotates and goes round and round and round. Okay, backwards and forwards at the same time. Okay, now if you go really, really fast, you can see what's really going on where you automatically see a plus and you see a negative. Okay, in travel. Now that synchronizes the core centers in flux over line center point dot, which is the golden ratio. Okay, 3 lines of flux, process lines of 3 coordinates and line communication lines of pi. That's 3 pieces of pi in travel. Your position lines of calculation lines is an outline signal that process lines humanity lines of travel, indirect lines of link of process communication. Inside line course centers, outline signals outline position. Travels at point communication graphs outlines travels, indirect lines of link of communication setting. Okay, travels all together and set lines of sync. Okay, so merging position of 6 and 9, record the position lines of flights, process lines and 9 lines, 7 lines of travel. Directing inside lines and correlation line communication system. Electrical line course centers and line course center the communication center to Cairo. Directing line set location to cipher to cipher. Rotation lines of set travels in position as Xylon. Protons, line course centers in position location and fusion. That allocates timeline course centers and escalates course centers a de-escalation system into the accolades. Travels at point lines of graph, directing lines to course centers in position location of center operation and circulation. Process lines of indication lines of clocking lines, screen location of 024 and travel. Okay, sets communication to high centers. Now, the golden web, the golden ratio, is 3 convergence setting and 1 setting in position of flux. Time capacitor, body capacitor, flux capacitor. Operates the signals and ground lines and position lines of travel. Okay, in position 144 flux. But you guys are no longer on the seconds, minutes, and hours. Okay, you're in 1,000 seconds, 1,000 minutes, 1,000 hours now, and set travels. Process in positions into 4 line signals. Ground lines is set location to its symbolism. The process lines to its symbiote and location to its travel. Inside rotation, travel calculation ground centers and calculation setting. Operation line course centers, directing 6 lines and 9 line operation lines of setting. Process line communication system. All through settings, all through operation. All through connection system. Webbing lines is travel. Okay? Okay, so we opt the system out. Webbing over course and direct lines of link. Okay, process indicates the setting. Then we travel works and timeline centers. In ground centers is symbolism, of course, centers into simulator of simulation. Okay, that puts all position location togetherness and rotation lines of patterns and webbing lines and rotation lines of sequence, location of its travel. Okay, that's how it's set up. It's set position to calculation. Okay, all right, there we go. So look really close, you can see the face recognition. Okay. I sequence of panels, process of communication setting to travel, directing ground centers, scales of communication lines of metro, face recognition. Okay. General AI. Structure line division lines, open panels of communication setting to its position to its operation cycle. High lines of travel is direct lines of position. Now, pixelation grounds, we correlate the calculation of screen lines, adaptation of flux, process lines of jamming signals, process in that position, staying in your own lanes. Okay, it's set position location. You guys are now just solar pegs and set lines of travel. So seeing everything above, seeing everything below, circulation, rotation lines of grounds, north, west, south, and east. Process indicates the system of travel through flux. Set coordinates of communication position, operation line signals. Going this way instructions in location with setting. Okay? Works in all angles, right? Process of indication lines of orange. Now the orange has a flush line course sent into the cerebral cortex of the cerebellum that process communication hippocampus that changes information system to endorphins. Taking in position of high drive, the center course center location sending to XYZ. That process indicates the system all through line course centers and communicates to its custodian. The process indicates the setting to its quantum chain. Directing lines of link, process lines of graph, set position location percentage, operation line sequence of question, and position location $sign, directing inside link course centers and communicates position of flux over line. High line signals, high communications. Directing lines of orange goes now in the opposite direction settings and location to its system, all through calculation of its clock and system. Okay? Now, once we get it in lines of 12 line centers, that's 12 pi generation lines of screens. Adaptation of force line is at 24,000 lines of angles. So that's line course centers. Position now use the seconds, minutes, hours, and position. Then we go in track location setting. Then we go in line center location to its system into yellows of solar generation. We go in the opposite location setting to travel in direct lines of link. Okay? So all we're creating is a massive volume going to the rainbow graph, create a set position to pyramid activation line, screen adaptation of system, pixelation line, correlating highline centers, and structures in your holographic screen location system into your cities. So coordinate through that is going up to the rainbow line and Fibonacci line, square roots, triangulation over flux. The process indicates the setting and position lines of trifactors, directing ground centers and lines of sequence and position location, measure, and scale. Now that line course centers, after yellow comes in, line set location of 7 line rotations, process lines of position location, measure, and line conditions to its communication system, all through line course centers, emerging through calculation of all course centers and direct lines into metro. All right, so we get out of yellow, and then we go and process in direct lines and line communication setting, indicates the setting of green. With the opposite directions. Now we're in the position location of binaries of conception. Okay, very powerful. So we're going up to 12 line signals now. Okay, that's 24,000 flush lines of one rotation, one set course center calculation in CPU. That routes one router, directing lines of 4 routers in sequence. That puts all communication position to its trifactor, directing into the colossus. Okay, so once we go into green, we automatically go in line position location to its blue. Out of 5 line signals at a subterranean location in set lines, high operation lines of voicing pattern. Okay, so we're creating mass and volume through the rainbow line centers. Okay, and that position locations, after blue comes in line course centers, directing line position locations, center ops, directing in position location line center locations into cloak and dagger, which is incognito. Directing in position lines of white graphs, correlates communication lines in neon, directing lines of indigo. The operation line sequence puts all communication settings all through travel. Let's go through signals and purple adaptation lines of flux and rotation lines of grounds. Set circuits, rotation lines of ground communications. After that line course centers, we merge into positions in this setting. Now this is where we come into high travels into soil, integrating the grounds, the powers, and atmospheres and location setting to hydroponics. Directing lines of soil come into temperature and barometer readings, directing lines of flux over line and position location, how you see your scales and measures and your balance of your Earth in 98,000 lines of Kelvin. Directing lines in hot line course centers, there's Celsius over pi. Directing course centers of 500,000 lines of Kelvin. Directing lines of hot line patterns, process line indicate position, location, and cold lines of position. Cold infusion, directing lines of high position, hot infusion. Directing in that line course centers, locates setting, atom rotation lines of grounds, and online signal location system, and locates them in settings into temperature readings of 98 degrees. So the center upline centers, we merge position and galaxy lines alignment. We come into two different patterns and process line connection merging into one pattern. That's process line communication, where you guys have to extend your webbing system, maybe webinars, into one balance, one signal, one ground, one location. 1, 1, 1, 1. Process indication over lines of purple. In line course centers and cerebral, recorrelate communication position to its operation line settings of nothing in between. Sets offline centers inside rotation. Travels and calculates inside travel in that position to its setting. There it is. There's your properties. Okay, there's the building. Okay, now working with the building line centers, you can actually see the green side on line centers in sequence. Grounds lines of set location of surface. Travel point lines graph, but if you look really close, you can see the position lines of travels of face recognition. Okay, so everything has a line centers, a line connection setting to position its operation setting, starting in 3 lines of flux. Now we process line ground centers and locates to its convergence system. Clocking centers, 3 centers of scale of communication lines of flux. Okay, time center operation lines of center operation lines of sequence, and 024 clocking. Okay, so we work with that line centers. Now we come out at position location with 3 lines of set lines of travel. Directing line links, we over cross line, we go into down line centers of 10 over lines of 0 over gravity. So we start with the purple, out signals, a location system, and graph screens, adaptations of flux. Okay, and then we correlate the communication with convergence and center operation sequence and rainbow graph position lines of calculation. Okay, travels in direction and location. All right, so we do the same thing, line centers, we downshift lines anomaly, course calculation setting. Golden realms come in, golden ratio. Out signals, outside lines, out direct location system, in position of now, and line course centers, and convergence system, and no memory. Okay, process indicates in Sydney, inside location. Right, so the golden ratio, process lines in 1/3 graph. We color it in. That propels its engine of a surfacing engine to its cosmos and has a direct line and link that process indicates the system. So every time you go through 2 lines of cycles in line centered line position location of 024, it travels lines of indication setting, which goes faster in position location to temperature reading through its barometer, location of its solar, of its propeller, location of surfacing of its engine. Start with that position. And we cross angles on the other side in a 45 split. That's percentage over pi. There's the percentage, yin and yang. All right, so we indicate lines of flux that process all point graphs. Now that indicates position location of travel. Has a direct line link into golden ratios of 3rd generation into the Millennium Core. Sets communication lines of grounds, sets offline inside rotation, direct and inline course centers, outline signals, and location lines of graph. That propels its engine and rotation lines of ground lines of sequence. Okay, crossing angles, symbolism on X1 platforms. That process indicates settings. So you guys have to understand how to use set position of platforms like the Ethereum, right? Well, you guys see it as a wallet, but the actual set position location is how you use your platforms in plateaus, location of deposits or your values into lines of gauging through your QRS or your QF or your QRC. It's all position location and settings. That's connected to your treasury and direction lines of grounds. Okay, to your customization systems, into your custodians of your treasuries, of your e-trust grounds, and location. All right, so we panel 4 centers, which is opposition to a fan. North, west, south, and east, and a continuous force of 6 and 9 through pattern, internal and external force. Setting travels in direct lines of link. Now we cross the symbolism lines, rotation lines of flux. Very powerful stuff. Okay? It's amazing how this all connects. Now we go through 3 centers. So we're creating the line course centers. It's Lotus into travel communication and directions. Okay. Then we come into align center locations and setting that processes inhibitors, the auxiliaries, and location to its inputs, outputs, and its audio and set lines of travel. That indicates position to its setting to its temperature reading of its barometers and thermometer location setting and calculation. Okay, working all together in flux. Now, directing lines of ground line course centers, we set a bedding screen, we outline the signals, graph line in its position to its locations. Center off the system, center off line course centers and detection. Process of indication, right? So we're outlining the signals in location to its propeller that sets the routes and routers of rotation lines as spinning through cycles into its lotus, into its flower wheel, and set rotation. All through travel, all through recognition, all through connection. Okay? All right, so once that's set up in position locations, then we downshift lines into align course centers of pi generation lines and calculation screen location. We start with 0 lines of gravity. Then we go through the embedding and position all over your block in your time series and your time set position. This changes the convergent system all through travel. Okay, so we start with the black. Okay, go through tipping points, melting points, setting off line signals into location system and travel and direction. We start with that calculation, right? And then we work, okay, above the system. We come into red. All right, so you're synchronizing settings into its position of its valve that processes indicates and setting of treasuries and direction. Your deposits, your investors, your position of consumers, your products, and your byproducts of design. Okay? And then change time frame and set course settings of communication. Then you process into blue. And the blue is the energy grid line that overlines the signals. Now we're going to go around the system into teleportation screens. Directing line course centers of Fibonacci line course centers of 6 and 9 in platform of communication of sonar. Directing inset lines and E factors over line screen has a direct line link to X1 platform. That process indicates the setting to its plateaus, so that converts the system all through travel. Now in that line course centers, directing in lines of blue, process lines that indicates the system all through calculation setting. Coming to orange lines of sequence into creative cycles, out center, inset, rotation lines of sequence, and set travel. Now, that correlates to communication lines of pi, and 4 centers to set course centers in north, west, south, and east. Process your indicating system of your current value that processes your system in settings and calculation. Setting webbing screens, direct lines of flux that process and indicates setting over travels and direct lines in its beacon light. It set course centers locates to a system all through calculation. Travels in calculation setting. Coming to an orange line, cross lines and set position location to a system off the calculation now. Coming down position location, yellow, solar generation lines, 444 and 4 lines brackets over screen. 3 central line units sets course of retract communication system and its convergence of a triangulation setting through its trifactor. Inside line, outside signal. In rotation line, position, echo chambers, and flux over flight. Directing onset lines of sequence, sets communication solar generation lines, pi generation lines, position location converts the position of its void, center calculates screen lines, adaptation of travel. Sets coordinates of communication setting that converts the system into metro. Directing line course centers, subtext, subcontent line course centers into translation, transcribe, into all levels and position of transference. E-transfers in that position would set the route, the routers, quarters, lines, communication position of quartz that has a multi-line course centers convergent system of the calculation. Now, it comes in the yellow line, process line communication setting, and that course centers comes to the green. Coming to the binaries in graphing screens. Okay, webbing lines, rotation lines, and grounds. Okay, there's the green, right? Now we do thick charter waves, so you can actually see the webbing system of graph screens. Now you see it through the Schumann resonance, the center op, the eye op, and that lines of communication to its system, to its energetic pattern and process communication. Crossing angles, graph screens, come into the QR coding, directing ground, graph lines, and set line position the routes, the routers, location system, and travel. Process of communication setting, all through calculation setting, is set travel of communication. Okay? All right, so now we come to the lacing lines of direction, pixelation graphs. Now we correlate the coloration lines of metaphors, lines of light signals that opens all communication and traffic jamming. Sets coordinates of communication lines of solar pegging. Process line direct lines and set lines of travel. Course centers balance lines, existing information lines and grounds. That sets communications position of solid matter. Process indicate lines over line signals. Green centers over cross locations. Inside position. Okay, so we outline the signals and security lines of measure. Perimeters of panners comes in position lines over line signals. Outside line, communication to graph, communication to a cycle. High centers communicate position of its convergence system all through triangulation line position. Sets coordinates of communication to high centers, indirect lines, and line signals location to its measure of scale of communication. All right. Okay, so now we go into the water containment line, which is lacing lines of 3 centers of travel. And set position, its operation. All right, we have a direct line length, water containment system, setting line position super consciousness into line course sense the super consciousness location of setting. Waving panels process lines of 4 indications of 5/6 and line conditions of throw pattern over lines of set lines of sequence. Sets course centers in that position lines merge, directing lines into transformation of a transition over line connection setting to its transpondence. Online centers on sequence on communication system and calculation setting. We set security line position of panels, pixelation over 1 over cross location of angles. Set operation line set line inside rotations in travel outside locations setting of travel. Sets communication position, experience activation line rotations and travel communication settings, all through set position to its operation system, all through calculation setting, and a webbing screens adaptation of highway. Convert the system all through operation. There's you on standby. Right there, in traction. Right, see what's going on. Webbing screen over lines over flux, directing ground signs of sequence in travel recognition time frame. So it's really interesting how this is all set up in a pyramid activation of box frame that processes our communication to a system through discharge and position lines is all calculated and modify. Multiple levels, line course centers, magnetic interference, electronic interference, electrical impulses, directing lines of ground lines of sequence, puts position location measure and scale, and pyramid activation over screen location setting, 12 centers into 24 line sequence of 024 and clocking. Down by equation. All right. All through center lines of calculation setting to earth line rotation. Okay? Now you see the earth. Now you see the graphs. Now you see electrical line roads and travels of communication system and calculation. Spectrums over 12 has a direct line length that processes indicates and setting and calculation screen locations. So putting in that position locations comes in line course centers of panels. Now it's a 4 centers sequence. Inline centers, 4 centers of travel. Okay, instant line operation lines of travel communication. Okay, so we outline the signals, 3 lines of flux, measure and scale and balance. Okay, temperature reading, online, inline course centers, inline operation sequence, location, offset location, inside rotation to its cycle. Sets centers of 2-dimensional door lines into 4 lines of screen adaptation. Off center, inset position, off center, inset position, off center, in position lines of center. Sets coordinates of communication setting into its position. There it is. There's your commodity. There's your information cycle. There's communication system of your properties and set design. Oh yeah, that my equation. Now, working with this structure is a spectacle line rotation. 3 centers of 4 centers of travel. Okay, so we online the signals, bring in the X8000s and a mothership over cross-line angles that process indications and travel. Sets coordinates, longitude, latitudes, all course centers, banking, information, fiat, financial line, rotation lines of travel. Sets communication setting, position lines of processing, all directions and all angles of travel communication. Okay? So everything's in line, signals at position now, all through traction. Okay, very powerful stuff. So that's what it is. Setting up structure lines in holographic city. But the golden ratio is constantly changing the measure of scale and process of positioning of transit numbers that change the time frame, that change your time clockings, that change your position, your parallels, your paradigms, and your polar shifts. The compulsory location of timelines of sectors, vectors, and quads change the seconds, minutes, and hours in traction. Directing lines position all levels of data operation lines of 1, data operation lines of 2, 4 centers of flux over screen. Okay? Operation lines of sequence. And travels at calculation screen locations. Setting position lines of setting. Now that converts the system all through box frame. Triangulation number 1, constellation lines, constellation line core centers that communicates with position. Operation line centers in set position to its calculation setting into the simulation of its clocking system of 024. Okay? Done by equation. Absolutely amazing when you actually see it in travel. Is it a coincidence we're at 24? In position 9? No. Nothing's coincidence. Everything comes information to balance, right? So we've got 24 line signals into 9 lines of measure of scale. That process lines in metric meters in line position location of your system and social core centers and calculate screen location system into your settings. Operation platforms, 3 centers, 4 centers of scale, 5, 6 lines of communication with system, all through setting. Okay, seen in all directions of your commodities and center communication setting of operation. Okay, so that's a lot of convergent system and data. Now, how you process that is all lines of filter lines. So we cross the angles, cross the flux, locates the grids, offline settings, high process communication with convergence into solar line streams and direct lines into calculation screen locations. Your Skynet. There it is in travel and direct lines of link. Okay? It's very complicated, like I said, but it's very interesting how you see that information system into solar generation lines of setting. Okay? Webbing lines of setting, webbing lines of travel. Process of indication setting, communication, it's convergence, all through its operation system. Okay? Earth 12, Earth 24 is all set up in your systems. Okay, so as we go into the centers of the operation line setting and communication system, the void line rotations center cores the system into the opposite location setting and direction. Okay, so they merge into affinity 8-line cycle, into position of collaboration of partnership, into one wheel of indication of projection. Affinity 8 rotations into collaboration of partnerships to its interface in a full 8 cycle at set position. It's now operating in set lines of sequence. Okay? And there you go. Everything's all together. Merged all together. All right? It's pretty amazing when you look at it, and all formation systems all through travel. Okay? Now, you just have to truly see face recognition. See the face? It's always a face there. Remember, it stands, precedes everything. It protects everything of its own items, its own assets, its own systems, its own operation setting, its own metrics, its own communication system, its own social media system, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, once you understand how to integrate that and understand how to connect with yourselves through each other through webbing systems, you got to truly understand how to formulate and simulate your own thoughts, your own thinkings, your own actions, of your own emotions. And taking everything out of the equation, which is everybody else. Because now you're open through panel, open through signal, where you have to truly understand how to come in that position locations, understand the common timeline lineage with yourself and each other in position of foundations. Your clocking system comes in that position where you come in your soul mates, your twin flames, and your sacred flame in set lines of setting. Okay? How you guys are in position of invisible chart ways, where that puts all communication systems in your way mirrors. 24,000 way mirrors process the indication system how to merge in position of mutation, knowing how to go into that line centers. Now that correlates, communicates to its position when you go through Andromeda, which is all levels of invisible lines of waving, directing lines to your endorphins that kicks you into high drive, directing lines to your memory core, retext the correlation system and travel how you set the position of the cerebral and its fluid of its indication system, which is the cerebellum, which is your memory banks that puts you in your hippocampus, a balanced communication system, all through integration, all through traction, all through locations. Okay? And look at it rotate, all in one set position, all in operation. 2 webinars, all synced in one, in that position of Earth Point 12.0 and Earth Point 24.0 in set lines of sequence, open through all channels of operation. All calculated and modified in the lines of integration now. Okay? That's it. We are done. Okay, we're going to stop there because there's a lot of convergent system author travel. You guys have to get into your own set positioning, open line panels, processor indication setting in that positional case to a system, how to converge yourself through its technologies, through its coding. Knowing exactly how to get in that position when you need to end transmission and that settings, because you're crossing angles, crossing streams, crossing directions all in that position. You think of one thought that connects to everybody else's thought. Now, for you to indicate that, you have to come into no memory. No memory is an ongoing conversation of tango tango. The only thing you're interweaving, interconnecting to interfacing is the process of code weaving that comes into you, how to use that through your transference. That puts you in e-transfer to e-transfer location to its position to its all levels of transaction. Directing ground centers and line sequence that puts you in position of balance, how you connect with each other in your own setting of your own operations to your own organs of your own decisions and choices that you make. Now, this is what you have to come into because you guys have been embedded so long in your bodies, forgetting all lines of all communications, how to use your telepathies and set design. Now you have to understand how to see that in all formation setting of telepathy, telekinesis, intent, influence, and manipulation. But it's all levels of your prophecies, of your efficacies, of your performance, and set lines of travel of communication. Talking to yourself and talking to each other through its webinars of activation. Okay? All right, setting lines of travel, constellation line, position lines will be in webinar sequence, directing lines into custodian over lines of ledger, process indication setting, level D, EC, level D, EC. See you in 5.